Hey everybody, this is Doug Kenny from Relentless and Unstoppable. I'm here with my co-host Jack Bates, and today we have the producer of Bridge to Terabithia with us. Hey, how you doing?
Afternoon or evening, depending on where you guys are at.
Yeah, so it's nice to have you on, and Bridge to Terabithia is one of my favorite movies from my childhood.
Yeah, well, I was not just the producer, I also wrote the screenplay. So that's, producing is one thing, but the writing was a little bit closer to my heart. I'll just jump right in with it. For those who are familiar with Bridge to Terabithia, they know it's a book, but what they may not know, it's based on me as a child. My mother wrote the book after my relationship with my best friend ended. I'm not going to ruin how it ended in real life for anyone who's not familiar with the book or movie, but there was a tragedy involved, and I was no longer friends with my best friend. And my mother, who was already a children's writer at the time, decided to write the book. And as she tells people, out of therapy for herself more than anyone else. In fact, both my parents treated me very much like Jesse in the book and the film, kind of like a broken china doll with 1,000 fractures, which they felt if they just kind of hugged me too tight, I would just break into a million pieces. So much like Jess in the book and in the film, they kind of just sort of walked around me and didn't really help me. But that was the way she was able to get through it. It was a very tragic, situation. My friend's family suffered terribly from it. And then many, many years later, when I was a screenwriter, I had already made a couple films. I decided if someone was going to make a movie version of it, it should probably be family, because that way we would be able to protect the story as best we can. The one thing about making movies is the more money there's involved, the more troublemakers who want to change the movie. And so that's why, believe it or not, I was a producer on the movie, because I knew if I was just the writer on the movie, I would lose all control. And so if I was at least a part of the project as a producer, they could not get rid of me. What people may or may not know, the average film, the average Hollywood or studio film has 7 to 8 writers. Generally, when you see the final credits in the movie theater, you see maybe 2. You see 2 writers, and then you might see someone who says story by. And you might go, well, what is that about? It means that was another writer on the project that was able to get some form of credit in the film. But the way it works is generally there's always a lot of writers on a large film. There doesn't need to be. But like I said, when there's a lot of money, there's a lot of chefs in the kitchen. And the one way Hollywood producers look at writers is, I love your story. Now here's what's wrong with it. And here's how we're going to fix it. And maybe use you to fix it or not. And so I knew that as long as I was attached as the producer, if they fired me, I'd still be around. And the first thing they did after we started going into production was fire me. And they hired a writer who they paid a ton of money, and then fired him, and then hired another writer who made even worse version and fired him, and then brought me back aboard to fix it, but for no extra money. And then when we were starting to really get into the crux of making the movie, we had all the Disney heads complaining. They're like, how are we $700,000 already in the red for this movie? And I said, well, that would be the $350 you paid one writer and the $400,000 you paid another writer, and you fired them both to bring me back to fix the script. So let's move forward. But that's why I tell a lot of young filmmakers. They go, what's the difference between a movie that's 100,000 or 100 million? A lot of money goes missing. That's really the only difference. You have the same headaches and challenges to make the movie, but when there's that much money involved, every nut or bolt is sort of like NASA. It costs like $500,000 for a nut that you can get at the hardware store for 5 cents. And it's just the way the movie business is. It's a very unique, strange, and messy business.
Yeah, for sure. I've heard a lot of things like that. So, how'd you get Disney involved?
Well, like I said, I had decided that I was going to protect the property. And while I was working on other films, I was approached by several different companies. And they said, we just want to get the rights back from you. We really don't want you involved at all. We'll throw some money at you. And I said, no, I'm going to be a part of this project. I'm going to write at least the first draft, and I'm going to be a producer because I want to keep an eye on the product. And Disney came to me in the 90s and said, we want the product, we want the property, you need to go away. And I went, no. And then they came back, they said, all right, we'll buy your script, but you have to go away. And I went, no. And then they finally went, okay, we'll buy the script, you can be a producer, but what happens to the girl can't happen. And I said, well, that's not going to happen either. So in the end, I got all three wishes. Of course, be careful what you wish for, because then the roller coaster began. But you know, it was quite a thing. And interestingly enough, it was not Disney. Disney came through Walden. I had turned Disney down many years earlier, and then Walden came, and they said Disney wants to partner with us on Bridge. And so the first writer that did the first draft of Bridge was actually, the project was owned by Fox, and Fox was so angry with the rewrite they dropped it, and instead of putting it Turnaround, which is, I don't know if your audience is familiar with Turnaround, but that's where a lot of great movies go to die. A studio wants to hold on to it, but they're not going to make it, so they put it on a shelf, and it can languish there for decades. But luckily, Walden was able to convince Disney to buy the rights from Fox, and then we started moving forward on it. So it could have ended up on a shelf, just like many, many other projects, but luckily, cooler heads prevailed in that scenario.
That's awesome. How long did it take to develop it, meaning develop the plan for the project?
Well, when people ask me, you know, how long for me personally, I say it took about 20 years. And it wasn't because I was lazy or I kept misplacing the script. It was because I was waiting to find the right partner. As I mentioned, I had turned Disney down a decade before. And once basically I signed on the dotted line, it went remarkably fast. My first film was at Sundance in 2005, and I literally hadn't signed anything. And by mid 2005, I was in negotiations with Walden, first Fox, then Disney. We were shooting in 2006, and then by 2007, I think it was February of 2007, we released. So it was a quick turnaround.
Great to hear. That's great to hear, man. So, what made you decide to become a director or a producer in the first place?
Well, I haven't directed a major thing. I've directed a couple of shorts yet. I do want to direct at some point. That does give, for writer directors, that does give you ultimate control on your property. It really is the safest way. Because I've made several films, and when you have a director who has a different vision than you, it can be a very unhappy scenario. So, you know, what I tell a lot of writers is you're writer director till someone pays you not to be. So in other words, you should really be pitching your concept. This is what I want. I want to direct it, even if you've never directed before, because the great thing about filmmaking is it is art by committee, and you can surround yourself by very good people. You can surround yourself by a great cinematographer, DP. You can surround yourself by a good first AD, second AD, good line producer, and they will help guide you. Every film that I've worked on, the cinematographer was better than the director, to be perfectly honest. And some of our best shots were the cinematographer's decision or choice, or request, or negotiation with the director to shoot it. So, you know, I started out actually as a playwright. I mentioned that before we actually went on, I think. I'll go way back. You know, I grew up in a very tough town. I was a small kid. I got beat up a lot. And I learned very early on that bullies don't punch nearly as hard when they're laughing. So I became a comedian, basically. You know, I was known as the class comedian, not class clown. There's a big difference. Teachers are really annoyed by class clowns. They appreciate class comedians because it's all about timing, when to say your lines, not to interrupt the class, make the teacher laugh as well. And so it takes some real skill to be a class comedian as opposed to clown. But so that's really it. I really was funny so I wouldn't get beat up. And then sort of developed into acting. And I was starting to professional act by the time I was 14 or 15. I had my first union card when I was 18. I went to London to study to become a stuntman. And while I was there, I took a playwriting course. And my first play was produced at the University of London. And then when I came back to the States, I continued to pursue, I had to finish college or my old man would have killed me. But I continued to do stunt work and acting in film and TV. And then I did a couple national tours. And then I moved to New York City to really pursue the art. But even with my union card, getting work was difficult. So I really did a lot of writing early on and started to get some of my plays done. I was on a small soap opera. I mean, I had a small role in a big soap opera, but it was called a recurring U5, which means you never got more than 5 lines. So you never shot anyone or raped anyone or stabbed anyone. You know, basically, I was the maitre d' at the Palace restaurant for Renee Buchanan, and that was my gig on One Life to Live. So I really worked on writing then, and my writing really picked up, and I got many, many plays done in and around New York, but it's still, you know, chump change, as they would say. And then 9/11 happened, and I had a construction demolition background. That's how I helped put my wife through law school. And I just put on my hard hat and I walked into Ground Zero when I worked there a couple of days after the attacks. And it affected me in many, many ways. I don't think anyone who worked there wasn't changed dramatically from it. And the two things I came away with it, I wanted to do something more for my country and service my country some way. And I was already too old to be a New York fireman. They had to cut off at age 30. So I became a fireman on Long Island. And I've been a fireman since 2001. But I also told my wife, I said, you know, I think I'm a pretty good writer, but I could get on an airplane tomorrow and it may not land. And, you know, I just seem to be banging my head against the wall as a playwright. So I'm going to take one of my plays and I'm going to make it into a little film and I'm going to send it to a film festival in California called Sundance. This is how ignorant I was. It's actually in Utah, but I thought it was Sundance. It was in California because it's Robert Redford. And I'm like, and, you know, it's a pretty good play. So if I make a pretty good movie, it should get in and we'll take it from there. Now, I was very naive, but that was probably the best thing I had going for me because it got in to the festival, got into Sundance in 2005. Then people started returning my phone calls about Bridge to Terabithia, and I've been making movies ever since, really. And so, you know, one thing I do talk at lectures and stuff, it's about triumph over tragedy. And, you know, 9/11 was probably one of the most tragic things I've ever experienced. But I was able to manifest something out of it and kind of pivot my career to a point where now I'm making movies fairly regularly, but also managing to have a life outside of the Hollywood thing. Most of my friends aren't actors or writers or filmmakers. You know, I live in a town on Long Island. I'm a fireman. I'm also a New York State Parks Commissioner, which parks are kind of interesting, but the more banal element is that I'm in charge of commuter parking into New York City, but, you know, pays the health insurance. So it's always good to have a job that covers health insurance. So I basically tell people I have ADD when it comes to having a profession. I've never had a real job. I've just had thousands. And when people ask me what I do, I say, well, what day of the week is it? Because literally it changes. Like I did a stunt job. I still do stunt work. I did a stunt job 10 days ago. And so, you know, on Monday I was doing stunts. On Tuesday I was the parks commissioner. On the next day I was talking about making a movie with some people in LA. So I bounce around a lot.